Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good following morning. This is AMA number 65. Today is June 17th. Very important show today. We're going to talk about Holocaust Survivor Day, and we're going to talk about Holocaust memory, survivors, and we have very, very special guests, two really amazing leaders in the Holocaust space. Ulrika Citron and Maria Zalewska, who I will bring on in a little bit. Very exciting to have them today, and I'm excited when two guests, as we know, two guests are better than one, especially when you have such wonderful guests as these two. Hello, Vicky Arkin Warner. Very nice to see you, Vicky. Long time no speak. Saul got a haircut. Saul, post a photo. Benji is here. Good to see the usual suspects. Good to see you guys. I will, good. Just seeing, oh, there's Emmy. Excellent. Hi, Emmy Warner. Very excited. Emmy and I doing a project together. Emmy works at JP Morgan, and very soon I will be speaking to Emmy at JP Morgan, JCC Morgan. We're gonna merge. Think we'll get the better of that deal, but at JP Morgan. Kasha Leonardi. Good morning, Kasha Leonardi. Kasha, I think I'm wearing a shirt that Kasha Leonardi bought me a very long time ago. Good morning, Jeffrey Rolat. Good morning, my brother in Florida. Good to see you. Good to see everybody. What's going on here? Getting busy. It's Ride for the Living coming up this year. Will be a little bit different, obviously, because of Corona. And the ride this year is going to be me and Marziana. On June 27th, we will be riding from Auschwitz-Birkenau to Krakow, to JCC Krakow in Krakow, of course. Last year it was just me riding myself, and 2 years ago was 250 people. So it's from 1 to 2 is 100% increase of people, which is great. So I'm excited to do that with Marziana. I will represent, the outside world, and Marziana will represent the future of Jewish Poland, of young Polish Jews. And she's the Hillel director, which is she's building Jewish life with our great partner Hillel International here in Krakow, and somebody herself who has an amazing story. So that's exciting, but we're not really only riding ourselves, are we? The two of us. We are riding with 2,800 people, and riding for 2,800 people all around the world who are participating this year in the Ride for the Living Global Challenge, which number is for us just absolutely amazing that we've done that. Something like 50 partner organizations, 60 partner organizations. I lose track of the numbers. So we're excited to be doing that. And thank you to everybody who's joined us. Thank you to everybody who's supporting people who've joined us. Thank you everybody who's supporting me. If you'd like to support me, I am still very far. I'm 1/3 away from my goal, but there's still plenty of room. So please support me. There's a link on my Facebook page, and probably pestered you with an email, or will be pestering you with an email very soon. So please help us continue what we're doing, taking care of the survivors and their families here in Krakow. So it's good. This week I'm a little more rested. Last week, if you tuned in, I just got off a plane. So it's nice to be able to sleep in my own bed, in our own bed in Krakow, and not be traveling, although it was great being in New York and in Florida and seeing all our friends. I got a few cool pickups along the way that I wanted to show you guys. One is this flashing thing. This is actually, if you see that, that is actually a representation, a graphic representation of the New York City subway. And what's cool about it, I saw it in the MoMA gift shop, and I thought, oh, that's cool. It looks like the New York City subway. And then I realized upon further examination that it's actually showing you the exact positions of the trains in real time via Wi-Fi. So once I saw that, I was like, oh my God, that's literally the coolest thing ever. I'll show it to you again just because I'm obsessed with it. And I have to show it. So it's connected to my Wi-Fi, and in real time, it's showing the trains entering the station. When it lights up, it means it's just one of the trains, and the colors are, of course, the colors of the lines entering the station. So for a New York boy who took the subway to high school every day starting age 11, you can imagine it's very exciting. I feel like I have a little piece of New York with me. But I don't only have that piece of New York. We all know about my sign proclivity. When I was in Florida, I went to a shop with Jeff and Lori in Boca, and a great shop with amazing signs. And look at this that I bought in this place called Wolf's Antiques. So McDougal Alley, which is very cool because McDougal Street, we all know, but McDougal Alley is a tiny little street. So there, I don't think many signs at all. So I have this McDougal Alley Street, McDougal Alley. It's at McDougal Alley. I want to say Alley McDougal, which is like Alley McBeal, but no, McDougal Alley. And I got this sign, Beth Israel Medical Center. If you will remember, it was, I think, on 18th Street or so, Beth Israel Hospital in New York. That's no longer there. But what's really, for me personally, cool about it is my father, who is 85 years old and who grew up on the Lower East Side. My father was born in Beth Israel. So it's a little piece of home. I have some other signs. Maybe I'll show you show you guys next time. So that was a fun thing, getting some signs and getting my new toy. Kasha and I are going on Saturday to Warsaw for the day. There's some party that Marta and her partner are going to, and they've invited me and Kasha. It's supposed to be sort of a very interesting, one of those fabulous Warsaw parties that we can only dream of in our little village of Krakow. So that'll be exciting, going to Warsaw just for the night, come back here on Sunday, and then I will go on Tuesday to Israel, which I haven't been to Israel since the previous election. So that means March 2020. So exciting to go back to Israel, especially for Holocaust Survivor Day, for the activities that are going on there. So maybe first I want to talk about what's happening in Krakow for Holocaust Survivor Day, which you know is our big new project. More and more organizations and people coming on board all the time. I think it's really reached a pretty serious international level. Here in Krakow, we are going to do a special Shabbat dinner, our first Shabbat dinner in, I guess, a year for the survivors, Friday night. And we're doing a special panel here about survivors on Thursday, the 24th, which is Survivor Day. And during the dinner, we are going to dedicate a tree. So one of the trees in our courtyard, we will dedicate it to our Holocaust survivors and have a little ceremony and put up a little plaque, which I think is really, really sweet. I'm so excited that I'll be back from Israel for that on Friday, our first Shabbat dinner in a year. I wouldn't miss it for the world. So luckily the flights are better and better from Krakow to Israel. So I'm actually able to go to Israel just for a couple of days and be back here, direct flight both ways, very nice. Coming back Friday morning with Rabbi Avi and Hadley. So that's cool that we'll fly together on Friday. But in Israel on Thursday, I'm going to what's going to be an absolutely just, I think, incredibly meaningful event that I will not forget for a very long time, which is the Holocaust Survivor Day celebration at Habima. Now, I don't have all the details, organized by Colette Avital, who is the chairwoman of all the Holocaust organizations in Israel, the survivor organizations. And she has invited, and I understand is busing from all over the country, about 900 Holocaust survivors to Habima, where they will be honored and celebrated. And I feel incredibly, incredibly lucky to be there and to be able to be a part of that, which is an amazing thing. There'll be cabinet, ministers there, and she's invited all the good and the great of Israeli politics. So it's an optimistic time to be in Israel with the new government. I think there's a feeling. I think there's a feeling internationally that good things can come of this, and we'll see how it is in Israel. But to be in a room, I know I've said it before, and I say it about 10 times a day offline, but to be in a room in 2021 with 900 or so Holocaust survivors, and whatever that final number will be, is something really life affirming. And I'm very proud of all the hard work that Seb and the team here and just our partners all around the world have done and making this Holocaust Survivor Day a reality. We've written a prayer. Rabbi Avi wrote a prayer that we're going to put out there as well. So besides an online event on the 24th, that's going to be carried, and all organizations are sharing it. It'll be available. You can register for the Zoom, or you can just tune into holocaustsurvivorday.com. And that's an online event. We'll ask people at 8 p.m. that day to everybody to say a Holocaust survivor prayer that we've written, which is really to the survivors, but maybe even more so to the rest of us. May we, continue to honor the survivors, but also may we have the strength and walk in the footsteps of the survivors, which I think is what we should all be aiming to do. So it's going to be a busy week. The AMA next week will be on Friday. We'll do a recap of Holocaust Survivor Day with me and Avi after we get, and maybe other guests. We'll see who's going to join from Holocaust Survivor Day. We might have some special guests for you. That'll be Friday at 5 o'clock, so 1 hour later. And then Sunday is I'll do the Auschwitz bicycle ride from Auschwitz to the JCC. So very, 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 very busy 10 days ahead. It's been a busy few weeks, but we like that. Corona was difficult for us in many ways. And one of them was we were busy in a different way, but we weren't the usual absolute hub of action and activity that we usually are. So people starting to come back in the building, starting Shabbat dinners, starting to have guests a little bit, starting to make plans, starting to travel, life getting back to normal for us here in Krakow. And we, again, are always looking at our Krakow community, but we're always, of course, looking beyond to the rest of the world. And with that, I will look beyond my office to bring on my guests today. Two amazing women, two amazing leaders. Ulrika Citron is the board member of the USC Shoah Foundation Next Generation Council member. She was born in Sweden. She lives in New York City with her husband and 3 children. She's involved with UJA on their community initiative for Holocaust survivors. She's on the board of the governors of the National Holocaust Museum in Amsterdam, and she's very involved with building a new Holocaust museum that's opening in Sweden. And a fun fact, her husband Joel is also from Sweden, but they met in New York, which I love that story. And she's the child of Holocaust survivors. Also joining me, and also from New York, is Dr. Maria Zalewska. Maria is the executive director of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Foundation. She has a master's degree from Oxford and her PhD from the USC. She is actually also the honorary consul of Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum in the United States of America. She was intimately involved, and this is also where we worked together with her with the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz and the production of a film that was seen in 50 countries and by 250 channels. She's born and raised in Warsaw, and actually her great-grandfather was killed in Auschwitz. So there's, I think, a strong personal link for both of my guests today in terms of the amazing work that they're doing. So thank you so much for joining, both of you. I know you're both incredibly busy, and it's good to see you, and welcome to my AMA.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Ulrika. Good to see you.
Maria. Good to see you too.
I think you guys know each other a little bit.
A little bit.
little bit. So I wanted to start a little bit, and I want to talk about the organizations that you're involved with, both Ulrika as a lay leader and Maria as a professional. But before that, maybe a little bit about getting into your background. So Ulrika, you're the child of survivors. How much growing up in Sweden, how much of the Holocaust was both sort of in the air around you, and how much of it was something, did you speak about it? Did your parents talk about their experiences?
First of all, just to clarify, my father is a Holocaust survivor. He was a hidden child in the Netherlands, born in Amsterdam in 1940. So he was 2.5 years old when he was taken into hiding. He came to Sweden at the age of 19. met my mother, who is not Jewish, not a survivor, and they were married for 5 years. So growing up, I knew very little about my father's childhood. He was not much of a presence in my life. After my parents divorced, he ended up in the United States. However, I should say also that, to answer your question, my mother, I was very close with my grandparents, my mother's parents, and nobody really knew much about his background. However, we all knew, when you speak to children of survivors and you ask them, when did you find out your parents was, it's always that answer is always in the air. You always knew. I always knew, we all knew that he was a child of the Holocaust. We had no details, and I had some contact with him, but in my mid to late teens, I came to the United States to spend time with him. And that's when my yearning for knowing more really manifested itself. And I became very interested in knowing about his past and my own past, obviously. And I had been very close to my maternal grandparents and was always curious about what a luxury to have 4 grandparents. And I was always curious about my paternal grandparents. So that's the short answer to your question.
Interesting. And just as a follow-up, what about, were you involved Jewishly growing up? What was
No. I grew up in a very small town, very homogeneous small town in Sweden. Interestingly enough, the first synagogue in Sweden is in my hometown. So there was some Jewish presence there, but I was very unaware of it. Whatever existed, I was quite unaware of it. And my maiden name is Grunwald, so it's a very Jewish name. Yeah. But so I knew, and that I did know. So I did know that my father was Jewish, but it was something that was not necessarily discussed or paid much attention to. I didn't experience any anti-Semitism per se, just a little bit of an ignorance, I should say. I guess there wasn't much interest.
And only coming to America, then you started to connect to your father, and then of course moving here. And I'll maybe ask you a little bit about that in a second. But yeah, obviously being so involved right now, you've been on a path of
I'm trying to catch up. I'm catching up.
Well, I think doing a very, very good job of catching up. Maria, so maybe a little bit about your family background. So you're from for us, the big city of Warsaw, here in the small provincial Krakow. So maybe talk about, how, I'm always interested in someone's background of how they then, because what you're doing is your life at a certain point, I think, became very, very involved and very focused on, on Holocaust memory, the presentation of the Holocaust, and, in different media. So what about your background?
So actually, let me begin by acknowledging both of you, Ulrika and Jonathan, for always showing up for the survivors, for constantly finding new ways to do community outreach, and for always finding connections between Jewish and non-Jewish communities, between the past and the present. I think the 3 of us do very different things, but I think what unites our work is this deep commitment to sort of bridge building. So thank you so much for including me in this conversation. It's really it's a pleasure to start my Thursday in this in your company. And actually, to that point of bridge building, I think that this idea of sort of geographic connection, transatlantic connections between where I live now and Poland, but also this notion of growing up in Poland and growing up in the proximity to places of memory, to the landscapes of filled with memories of trauma. Some of them marked, like at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, some of them unmarked. It changes you. And if you start digging into your own sort of country's history, and you become curious, it can if it's nurtured, become your mission. and you know, these words might sound like cliches, but it truly is what happened. I was very much influenced by this book by Martin Pollack. He's an Austrian writer. Maybe you read his work. He calls the Eastern European landscapes, he calls them contaminated landscapes, contaminated by this tragic history. And growing up I grew up in a Catholic family. I went to church every Sunday. In Warsaw. That was part of my upbringing, but the other part of my upbringing was this awareness of Auschwitz and its history, because of my great-grandfather's death, who was just randomly arrested and sent to Auschwitz and murdered there. And two, my parents had a lot of Jewish friends in Warsaw, and I so happened to have a lot of Jewish friends in my sort of Warsaw bubble. So it was maybe not the most obvious Polish upbringing, if you sort of, you know, if you think about how in many ways homogeneous Poland was and still is. But so I guess it's a complicated answer. There was a familial link to the place of Auschwitz, but there was also curiosity, and in many ways, and I know the word sort of patriotic has become in many ways a dirty word, but I did see this seeking and thinking about the complex history of Polish-Jewish relations as some kind of a patriotic duty.
With your parents being, you know, having Jewish friends, and you sort of having Jewish friends as well, what would you say? Because, you know, there's sort of, when you talk about how, and you know very well, when you talk about Auschwitz, when people talk about it, and I wasn't there before, but when you talk about what it was like, the official Polish narrative about the war until 1989, and certainly places of memory like Auschwitz. If you visited Auschwitz in 1985, you could almost easily not realize that the Jews had been, you know, 90 whatever percent of the victims there. So I'm wondering,
100%.
Yeah, so in your family, like, in terms of the war was the war, and I think that, you know, in that sense, but the Holocaust, I think particularly in your family, that you have a non-Jewish great-grandfather who was murdered in Auschwitz. So was growing up, how much of the Jewish sense of the Holocaust was involved with your thinking about Auschwitz? And I assume, and obviously that's you've come to a different point as doing your work, but I'm just wondering where you started on that path to where you are now in terms of understanding the Polish versus Jewish context of Auschwitz, maybe?
That's a really good question. And, you know, truthfully, my generation, so I was born in early 1980s. My generation is and people a little bit older than me, but we are the first generation that has been taught the complex history of Polish-Jewish relations in a more nuanced way than my parents' generation. Certainly the communist period of Polish history consisted of some kind of a collective amnesia when it came to history of Polish Jewish trauma, but also the Jewish experience. You know, I don't, it's tricky. I don't like to say that sort of Polish versus Jewish history. You know, it's Polish history of Polish Jews and Polish non-Jews. And right. I like to think about it in this way. And I think the point is to embrace it as a shared history. Of course, not sort of forgetting about differences of the experience during World War II and the different types of experiences during the Holocaust. Now, so it's the night and day between what my parents were taught and what I was taught, and the types of information I had access to. You know, the 1990s and especially late 1990s, it became after discussions about Jedwabne, it opened up a completely new way of thinking about this history. And of course, it also revealed how difficult it still is, right? It's all wrapped up in issues of Polish non-Jewish trauma of World War II, and then identity building after World War II, and then having the communist oppression for 50 years. There's so many layers that it's fascinating in itself. The history of that discourse. The
history of the discourse is fascinating, and I think today, you know, I think though, you know, for me living in Poland, my fear is that the next generation will go back more toward the type of education that your parents had. In other words, we like to think of the world going and getting better and more knowledge and openness, but there's a real fear in Poland that we're moving toward a history that's less true and more used for politics in the way that Holocaust memory was used for politics during communism. And this is something that
I'm always an optimist. I hope you're wrong.
No, I'm an absolute optimist as well. I'm saying that's the concern. I don't think that I'm not ready to concede defeat, but that's our concern. So absolutely, Ulrika. So it's interesting that it wasn't necessarily this omnipresent, you know, maybe around you, but it wasn't something that you were really dealing with, talking about so much and this thing. You come and now with your husband, you're both so involved, in many different issues Jewishly, but the Holocaust is certainly something I think at the forefront of what you and your husband are spending, a vast amount of time and your interest in. So how did that happen? Did it become, what was that path for you to get so involved? And I'll talk a little bit about also the follow-up will be about your different involvements and what you're doing, and involved with one museum and now a new museum and the Shoah Foundation and UJA, and your husband on Auschwitz, between the two of you, you're very, very connected in many ways to Holocaust education and memory and survivor advocacy. What was that path for you?
I think we do wear a lot of hats, and we're involved in a lot of different places. And first of all, I think we feel this real urgency in the last number of, I want to say 4 to 5 years. And we feel this urgency. It's a race of time, the importance of carrying on the legacy of the Holocaust survivors. And for me, it's definitely grown, specifically issues regarding genocide, the connections between different kinds of genocides and how it has really resonated with me. And that's why the USC Shoah Foundation has become an organization I feel very passionately about the work that they do and how we use testimonies there to educate. And not just, most of the testimonies that we have in our visual archives come from Holocaust survivors. That's how it started. And it's grown into something much larger and bigger than that. It's not just this project that Steven Spielberg, the founder, initiated, but it's now grown into an enormous project, and that keeps evolving. And so then when I want to say in 2014, I decided to go to Amsterdam. And for the first time, I'd never been. My father has always told me that it's a horrible country, terrible place. You never want to go there. So I had all this baggage, and I decided, okay, it's time for me to go and do some research. And I was really welcomed there. And it was a very positive. My first trip was difficult. I had researched. I really knew very little about my grandparents and their lives. And it turns out that my father's mother, Rachel, when I converted, I took her name as my Hebrew name. And it turns out she came from a very large family. She had 7 sisters and brothers, and they were all killed, some at Sobibor, many at Auschwitz. And my father and his 3 siblings were really the only survivors of this very large family. They'd originated from Spain and come to Amsterdam in the 1600s. My grandfather had come from Miskolc, Hungary, and ended up and moved to Amsterdam in the early 30s with a mother and two sisters. And so, I don't know the history there, how a Sephardic woman married an Ashkenazi man.
So far,
That's for another time, I think.
Wow, I'm trying to keep track so far that we have Spain, Hungary, the Netherlands, Sweden, and the United States, where you live now so far. And
I was just told I could become a citizen of Portugal if I wanted to, but yeah, I just interesting. Anyway, so I think that the more I found out about my father's past, and hence my past, the more questions I had, and the whole question about genocide and how it happens, and how something like this can occur. I mean, 85% of the Dutch Jews were murdered, and up until 1940, they had really lived in it was one of those countries. It was a haven for Jews, for Jewish thinking, for Jewish life. People lived, they were integrated in society, they were accepted in society. And even up until 1938, German Jews would flee to the Netherlands from the Nazis, like the Frank family, for instance. And then in 1940, it all changed. And so there were a lot of issues that I was grappling with. Number one, my own personal history. And then I felt a deep connection to the Dutch Jews. And so, and this whole issue of not knowing what people, I felt that we've learned so much about those of us who work in this space of the Holocaust and remembrance. We know a lot, but there wasn't such common knowledge about the Dutch Jews. People, the Danish Jews, they were saved by the Swedes. People would mix up them with the Danish Jews, and the truth is that the Dutch really didn't want to deal with this after the war.
It's very much associated with Anne Frank, right? If you say
Anne Frank, it was
exactly. Because he's so well known, and maybe one of the real symbols of the Holocaust, that maybe people felt, oh, I know the Dutch Jewish story because I know, or I read Anne Frank's diary.
Right, and of course, and she happens to be German, but she was from Germany originally. Right. And her story, I mean, it's an incredible story, and her diary is so important to it's a treasure and it's holy. But the truth is that there's 120,000 Jews were killed, and it left a big hole in Dutch society. And so I feel this. But having become involved with the National Holocaust Museum there has been a real profound experience for me in many ways. I feel very connected to them there, and it's going to be a really, really interesting, and I think it's a new era, I think, for the Dutch. So many other things are going on now too. There's a real interest in learning more about the past, and they have this whole new project with the Stolpersteine Foundation. I'm sure many of your viewers know about the project in Europe, the brass stones that are placed in front of homes where victims last lived. Yeah. And that a German artist started in the 90s, and he's pretty much been in control of this project himself, whereas in the Netherlands, he's a German guy who is the liaison for this project there. He has been trained by the artist, Günter Demnig, the artist, and he's now making the stones. They built a workshop in collaboration with the Goethe Institute, and you can walk by there and see, they have large windows, you can see them make these stones. And the short, I don't want to go into too much into that, but it's a very exciting project, and communities and streets and neighbors, and of course, the descendants of survivors are involved with this project. So for instance, when we placed stones in front of my grandparents' apartment building, neighbors came downstairs and they looked, and they said that they also wanted to do this because the whole street were Jewish and nobody came back. And they want to to take on this project, and they want to raise money and funds to place stones. This, of course, is a big undertaking and takes a lot of effort. So the fact that in Amsterdam, I think Amsterdam is really the first place, or the Netherlands, where somebody there is doing it on site. So
On that
it's
scale,
very exciting.
we tried
On
to
that scale, and I mean, to memorialize, I mean, speaking of memorialization and commemoration, I mean, for me, it was a very, I think it's a very important, how do you memorialize someone you never knew, or someone who was killed my grandparents were killed at Sobibor. You know, how do you even grapple with that? And so it gives you something, at least, to
I like the Stolperstein very much. I think that it's forced us, you know, for me, one of the issues, the complicating issues of Holocaust commemoration is that we're very focused on the death and the mechanism of death. And I'm going to talk to Maria about that, which is the most potent symbol of that is obviously Auschwitz-Birkenau. And I always feel that it's, you know, I get it. I understand if you want to learn about the Holocaust and you have to go to one place, that's where you would go to understand, but you're sort of missing out on the lives that these people lived. And I very much like the idea of the Stolperstein because it's showing, in other words, it's connecting people, and you're reminded of the fact that these people walked down the same street and maybe even went to the same, you know, shop on the corner, you know, chocolate shop that's still there. So I think it's a very powerful idea. We tried to do it. You know, I had somebody who reached out to me about doing it in Krakow. There are a few in Poland, very few. And I went to the Institute of National Memory, which is something very, very politicized and very political in Poland. And I went to the director in Krakow, and we sat down, and it was one of the least pleasant, productive conversations I've ever had in, you know, as the director here. So.
Yeah, that's a shame. I mean, hopefully sometime in the future, but it's up to each country to make that decision. But I mean, it's a real.
Poland is not at the place where they want to, you know, they're like, oh, but it would be uncomfortable, and we don't need to, we have a beautiful city of Krakow. We don't need to remind people walking down the street, you know, that bad things happened here, which is sort of the exact idea of it, that the bad exists along with the good, and it doesn't take away the beauty of what's going on. But it's a little bit of a more subtle message, I think, in that sense. Maria, I wanted to ask you, maybe because I thought it would be nice for you to be able to explain a little bit about the structure. People understand, you know, Americans come, they feel they're going to Auschwitz, they think it sort of, in some sense, belongs to the Jewish people, and I guess in a certain sense it does, but the structure of Auschwitz-Birkenau is, of course, a state museum, and then there's the foundation, and then there's a second foundation. Can you maybe first talk just a little bit about the structure, and also what you do? In other words, you're running a foundation. What is the main purpose of your foundation? What is your, how does that how does that, you know, inform what you're doing on a daily basis?
Of course. So at the heart of everything we do, and I'll go into the sort of structural relationship between us and the museum, is the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum. And that is a state museum, as you mentioned. So it falls under the protection and under the I guess under the protection of the Polish Minister of Culture.
Yeah, the jurisdiction, I guess, as well. A legal the jurisdiction.
Yes, exactly. Then there are two foundations. One is located in Warsaw. It is the Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation. It was founded in 2008, and it has focused on raising money to preserve the preservation of the authentic remains of Auschwitz. In the beginning of the existence of that foundation, I was actually working for it. I briefly worked for the foundation in 2009 and 2010, so I'm very familiar. It's run by Mr. Wojciech Soczywica, who's the executive director. Our foundation in New York is, in a sense, a sister foundation. Our foundation's name is the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Foundation. However, we have expanded our mission. We initially supported the preservation under the leadership of our chairman, Ambassador Ronald Lauder, who has been committed to the cause of preserving the authentic remains of Auschwitz since 1980s, when he was U.S. ambassador to Austria. So that has been his life's mission. And we are very fortunate to have him as our chairman. And, combining our efforts with the efforts of our Polish partner in Warsaw, we have managed to raise a very substantial endowment for the preservation of the remains of Auschwitz. Now, our mission here in the US has expanded beyond that, and we're moving towards education. And in 2020, we pivoted and we moved towards survivors outreach. Right. And there were three reasons for that shift. One is that, as to echo what Ulrika was just saying, we live in a sort of quite unique moment in time, sort of a moment of existential crisis that was already felt before the pandemic. And that moment is, it's this moment when we ask ourselves, what happens when all the survivors are gone? What does it mean to live in a world in which there are no eyewitnesses of the Shoah? None of us know. And in a sense, we all dread this moment. And I actually would extend this question further. What happens to the memory of the Shoah when all of us are gone? The generation of children and grandchildren of the survivors. And I think that is the main question that motivates a lot of our work. And within that question, there is the fact that we're all very different. There are histories of that period. Not all of us are friends, not all of us are enemies, but we have this common shared history. And the question is, who will sort of translate it for future generations? And this notion of this existential dread, I think, was felt during the 70th anniversary when Roman Kent had this sort of call to action. He said, we do not want our past to be our children's future. Then in 2020, at the 75th anniversary, Marian Turski, who you're very close with, he spoke directly to this young generation, and he said, do not be indifferent. So this sort of moment of passage of this memory torch is almost tangible. Two, I think we're at the moment where, there's like this very clear intersection of the passage of time, but also a moment of new technological presence in our lives. And I'm talking here about both the sort of technological actuality and its potentiality, things that we already do in Holocaust Remembers, like the Zoom call and, online tools, and things that some organizations are developing, like VR films, augmented reality applications, et cetera, et cetera. And this adds an absolutely new angle to the process of Holocaust remembrance. By training, I'm a media scholar, so this is what really interests me, this sort of unique moment in time when online and offline sort of regimes of memory are intersecting. Yeah. And three, the pandemic. And the pandemic sort of sped up, I think, a lot of these, it brought to the surface a lot of these issues for everybody, not just for the few that have been doing Holocaust education. It revealed that even technoskeptics must acknowledge the importance and ubiquity of technology. There was no way to live without it. The survivors, just like us, they learned how to use Zoom, how to navigate, scheduling calls, doing online outreach. And so our foundation pivoted, and just like the survivors pivoted. So within that context, our foundation focused on a very intimate type of survivors outreach. We send Auschwitz survivors birthday flowers and letters. We organize bi-monthly Zoom reunions for Auschwitz survivors for high holidays, but also for small and big celebrations. Fun fact, we, for example, celebrated one of the survivors' engagement and wedding during the pandemic, which was amazing. So shout out to survivor David Marks and his wife, Kathy Peck, if they're watching. And all of our Zoom calls have been hosted by Ambassador Lauder, which is amazing. It allowed us to build this intimate community, and the calls are intimate but well attended. We have an average of 40 survivors on each Zoom, and it's really special. The focus is on 100 plus survivors whom both of you have met, they came with us to Auschwitz in 2020 for the 75th anniversary, under the leadership of Ambassador Lauder. And, you know,
this event was a very meaningful event, I think, for the survivors, for those of you who came to Poland, but for us, it remained. Well, we're dealing with survivors here all the time at the JCC, and our center was founded to take care of survivors, and now is taking, the original idea, and it became taking care of the whole community, and this, which really means survivors, their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. But when everybody left, and when you guys all got back on planes and the survivors left, this idea, being in that room with all of those survivors, had a profound effect on us. And I think that was really something that, especially during Corona, when our lives were interrupted, and someone like me, who's usually running around, traveling around the world, and was sort of forced, the last big thing I did before Corona, and I think for many of us, was that, right? And that's just sort of, that was this event that we're so involved with, and then all the survivors and everyone, you guys all leave, and we're like, wait a minute, this was just absolutely unbelievable to have participated in this. And I think that was the real impetus that over the year sort of grew and grew, and then it became, this thing that you're both involved with, which is coming off of this Holocaust Survivor Day. So I think there's a direct line you can draw between the 75th anniversary events in Krakow and Auschwitz and what we're doing next week. You're both so involved, and Ulrika, you and your husband in all different ways, and Maria, are we doing a good job? Are we doing enough to take care of the survivors? I mean, my feeling, and in many ways, and there's so many good things, and I can all, know all these amazing programs, especially in New York and with UJA and self-help and what you're doing, and all around the world in all different ways. But at the end of the day, if you ask me today, what is the greatest failing today of the Jewish people? The first thing I would say to you is that there are survivors still living in need. On some level, to me, I think it's not to say, that we're just completely failing, but to me, the idea that after all that they've been through, that we in the Jewish world should really be able to at least provide them with a certain level. And I don't only mean material needs, but just an idea of a comfort life. So overall, are we doing a good job? And I don't need to say, now we have to say we're not doing a good job because there are a need. I mean, we have the capacity that we have, but overall, are we doing a good job with that? And as we transition into a world where there won't be survivors, are we prepared as a people to, are we taking care of them? And will we be okay? How will we be as a people living without them, I guess, are my two questions really, maybe for you, Ulrika, and then also for Maria.
And first of all, I want to start by giving the UJA a shout out, because they really here in New York. Yeah. The UJA mobilized very quickly and has always put the Holocaust survivors first and front and center of their mission and their work. Taking care of them, spending a lot of resources with programming and supporting in many, many ways, partnering with organizations such as MetLife, Self-Help, etc. And I am involved with a committee called Community Initiative for Holocaust Survivors. And we have a program tonight honoring Gabby Major.
I know, I saw the email, and we had Mark Meaden. Mark Meaden was my guest last week and talking all lots about that. So we're
okay. Yeah. But at any event, so I just want to say that it was a Herculean effort what happened and how the UJA stepped up during this difficult time. Yeah. Are we doing enough? I mean, there's so many issues that are facing the Holocaust survivors. And the ones that are now still alive are very young during the Holocaust, and many of them children, some in hiding. And so during COVID, all of the issues that, their issues were so far more difficult than for most others. And it is, like you said, Jonathan, it is, it's the greatest shame that we have so many thousands of people, victims, and in Israel too, by the way.
Absolutely.
And so no, we're not doing enough. But at the same token, it's inspiring to see organizations that are so involved and doing so much. So we just have to keep working with these organizations, supporting them. And I certainly, I mean, in a country like Sweden, for instance, it's about 100 or so survivors left there. 10,000 survivors came to Sweden after the war in 1945. Half of them left, probably to go to the United States and Israel. And these survivors really injected new life and revitalized Jewish life in Sweden. And Swedish history it's a whole other, I think, conversation, and we can talk for hours about the history there and the Jewish history. But
yes, not to interrupt, but you also have so many of the Jews who came in 1968 were
68
Jews were 68 also survived. You had another wave of
another wave when the Polish Jews came when they were declared the enemies of the state in Poland. Correct. So the survivors there. It's a little bit different because the infrastructure in Sweden and social welfare system is at a different, it's different. But during COVID, boy, they suffered there, and Sweden really handled COVID very, very in its own different way.
In its own way.
So we lost a lot of survivors there, and but for a handful of people like Lizzie Shea, who is doing an incredible job in Sweden with her organization, Jewish Culture in Sweden, it's called. Yeah. And she really takes care of the survivors. And she's been very instrumental, together with my husband, Joel, to engage them and engage, support, and also starting this Speaking Memories series, taking their testimonies, having exhibits, and now that has led to a government commitment to a Holocaust museum in Sweden. And this Holocaust museum will be focused on the Swedish experience, the survivors who came to Sweden. Mm. And Sweden's role during the Holocaust, et cetera, et cetera.
What is the time? Is there do you know the timetable?
I don't know the timetable. It is in the works. There's a commitment from the government. This Prime Minister and the Minister of Education came to see the exhibit. It was a collaboration with the USD Shaw Foundation. So we had the testimonies, and we had the dimensions and testimony. I don't know if people know what that is. Yeah.
We had if people don't know, it's the amazing.
It's interactive. You can speak to the Holocaust survivor. And so the Prime Minister took a tour. And by the way, I just want to mention real quickly, this was in one of the largest museums in Sweden. It's a National History Museum. It was not in a Jewish museum, which is very important because you needed the exposure. You needed a place where you have a lot of traffic. And it was so well received, this exhibit. And the Prime Minister came to tour it, grappling with the rise of anti-Semitism, trying to understand how to deal with it and trying to figure out what to do. He and the Minister of Education was so moved by this exhibit that they decided we need to make this permanent. Meanwhile, other places in the country have wanted this exhibit, and it's a traveling exhibit. Now it's up north, and it's been it's so important. And so I just have to say that has engaged the survivors that are still there. We have been able to take two more, produce two more dimension and testimonies in the Swedish language. So Joel's mother, Elizabeth, sat for an entire week. She was interviewed by Lizzie Shea, and in collaboration with the Shaw Foundation, of course.
The cameras and the whole.
Yeah, and for an entire week, an 88-year-old woman sitting there asking.
I think it's such an amazing project. And somebody approached me here about doing it in Krakow, which I thought was absolutely, what better place if you think about as looking toward the future when there won't be survivors, but there will be Auschwitz, and people will visit, and we are, I think our Krakow community occupies a very special place in the Jewish world because we are the Jewish community next to Auschwitz. So, I
we
spoke.
should make that happen. Let's make that happen.
We will. And I spoke to Stephen Smith, this, and I spoke to Beth. Yes. I spoke to Beth Keane in LA because they're putting one in. Started this and looking for a space, and then Corona happened and froze everything. But now that things are thawing out, we're going to start taking another look. I think absolutely it's a must thing. Maria, also as something that you guys are now focusing more and more, I think, in the last year, which is this pivot, as you talk about, from the foundation toward the survivors. How will you balance? How do you see that? In other words, in terms of, on one hand, you're responsible for or one of the main organizations responsible for the upkeep of the camp and the visual the evidence, as it were, but also with the witnesses now. So how do you see that?
So to go back to your question from a few minutes ago, I agree with Ulrika that we're not doing enough. And I just came back from Kansas City, Missouri, where we opened up the Auschwitz exhibit, Auschwitz Not Long Ago, Not Far Away exhibit that was previously on display at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. It's an amazing, very unique exhibition co-produced by the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum and a Spanish company called Musealia. And, it brings together 700 original objects, and I don't have time to go into details.
Done by our good friend Michael Berenbaum, who is the curator.
Well, exactly, Michael Berenbaum. So, and I want to paraphrase what Michael Berenbaum said during the opening night gala. He said that the name of the exhibition, Auschwitz Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, right, it really evokes this notion. It's a scandal, and it's a shame that we live in a world where Auschwitz is not long ago, not far away, that we live in a world torn by nationalism, populism, anti-Semitism, political oppression, a cultural genocide, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not only that what Primo Levi said, it happened, therefore it can happen again, but it's more of this notion that survivors have to witness and have to watch the rise of anti-Semitism. Things are happening that they never thought they would have to see, witness and again. So we're not doing enough. And I guess I want to finish with take it back to Auschwitz, and why Auschwitz as a symbol is so important, and why I think it's of utmost importance for those who can to visit Auschwitz, for those who can't to learn about Auschwitz or go to Missouri and visit the exhibition. By the way, we already sold 80,000 tickets for the first 2 months of the exhibition. It's mind-blowing. I'm so thrilled that there is hunger for this type of education in the Midwest, and it's amazing. But notions of anti-Semitism, of dehumanization, of polarizing communities, these were not unusual notions before World War II. I think what Auschwitz reveals and really illustrates is how the Holocaust was a matter of specific decisions, incremental choices, policies compounded one by one. And it just really, it shows you what can happen and what this initial dehumanization that Marian Turski talked about during the 75th anniversary, what boycotting Jewish businesses, et cetera, what it can lead to, which I think we can all agree is unfortunately as valid as ever.
I think that you make an excellent point, and to me, one, not to try to be glib about it, but I think one of the most important reasons to visit Auschwitz and to see what is on, and especially from the what's on display there, is that to understand that Auschwitz didn't begin with Auschwitz. And
absolutely,
really what you're saying, and then people, it couldn't happen again because that aspect, but the you use the word incremental choices and change, and that's really what I think many people find frightening these days in the world. And my general, and again, I preface it by saying I'm an optimist, but a lot of the lessons that I grew up with a very strong Jewish education in New York City, thinking that the world learned certain lessons. And as I'm an adult living down the road from Auschwitz for 20 years, I am witness to the fact that perhaps the world may not have learned those lessons. And those of us who understand that, and those of us who are working in this space, need to be sure to try to spread that message. But I think if there's one concern I have sometimes about Holocaust education, is that it's, what are we trying? It's almost, I almost sometimes think that non-Jews should focus more on the Holocaust and Jews should focus less sometimes. And I don't mean it exactly that way, that we should focus less, but there's a danger for a people to build a certain amount of its identity on the tragedy that happened to it. And I think that's why I personally find myself so drawn to the survivors and so focused on the survivors, because at the end of the day, it's not only that they managed to survive what happened to them, it's that every single one of them that we're talking about, or the vast majority of them, not all were able, but the vast majority of them rebuilt their lives and went past that. And I think this lesson, not only of we have to be careful not to let the Holocaust happen again, but we have these role models among us who are still among us, who went through the worst tragedy imaginable and are able to rebuild their lives. And those of us who lose a job or stub a toe or have a bad day, or someone's nasty to us or something, there's a lesson to be learned from them. And I think that this, our desire here in Krakow, not only to help with Holocaust education, but to shine a light on the survivors is because I think the Jewish world needs to see them more than ever with the increase in anti-Semitism.
Agreed.
I cannot speak to the notions of Jewish identity, but I think that unfortunately the notion of remembrance goes hand in hand with the notion of amnesia. And I always ask myself as a non-Jew in many rooms that I go to, what happens if the Jews stop focusing on the Holocaust? I understand this, but what happens if we do too? Meaning, it's a very it's a complicated balance, and I think we should all remember, and I think we should all honor the survivors, and I think there is room for both.
Yes.
And it's a responsibility we all share, Jews, non-Jews, for all humanity. It's not just if it can happen to the Jews, as we know, it can happen to anyone. And I think that's a big message that we need to keep teaching and speaking out about. The Holocaust was the largest genocide in modern history, and we need to learn from the lessons and understand that there are connections between, for instance, a genocide in Rwanda. You go there. I was there with the Shoah Foundation in 2014 for the commemoration to commemorate the genocide there, and we traveled around the country to sites of atrocities, and it's just incredible to see. Really to see and make such connections. And so, that's why I really believe in the mission of the Shoah Foundation, of the testimonies that we have, and learning from the eyewitnesses of these atrocities, and to really keep teaching.
Amen.
I completely agree. I think there is a way, without universalizing the Holocaust, to shine light on the universal themes that led to the Holocaust, demise of democracy, the role of elites, the role of bystanders, et cetera, et cetera. Absolutely.
And how it starts, that's just right. I would just want to reiterate, it can start with just intolerance, with discrimination, and it really can.
With language.
It can lead to genocide. It's not to be underestimated.
No question. Thank you both so much for not only for being with me today, but for doing all that you do. Those of us who are newer in the space really have people to look to and to learn from and to partner with. And it's exciting to be able to work with you both in different venues and different areas. And I look forward to staying in good touch and to seeing you in person both soon, and to seeing you on our next call in a few
25 minutes.
25 minutes. So be well. Thank you so much.
It was a great privilege. Thank you so
Ulrika.
much. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.